You think about it's some sort of large scale disaster type situation, massive, something long term that really wreaks havoc on society in general. People are going to see a lot of that stuff, and people are going to you're going to have all those different reactions. Like you said, there's going to be that PTSD. You don't know how one person's reacting to it or going to, as opposed to another person. And some people will internalize it until it blows up. Some people, it may not affect them at all. Some people, I mean, it's different for everybody. And I think in a situation like that, you're going to see a lot more, I guess, situations that present itself, that the opportunity for that, even just the earthquake itself or the natural disaster itself or the event itself could be that post-traumatic stress. A car accident could lead to that post-traumatic stress, not to the extent of, like going overseas and being involved with it for years. I don't think.
But that, I think you can have complex trauma and stuff like that happens from buildup. But that's where one of the fallacies that we have, where people say, it was just a car wreck I was in. Anytime you have this thing where you're fearing for your life, it affects people differently. Kevin in the chat, Broken Nomad, says some places are getting better at providing critical incident stress management services for members. Every day, that's part of the problem. We have a team that comes around if you have a really bad incident. Every day, those crews are being subjected to really bad incidents. Anytime you're flying through a city, you're always going to have stuff where you have somebody that their life's in your hands and it's going south. Like, you're going to have problems with that. Every day they go to work is a critical incident stress management situation for those people. And so we cherry pick these really bad incidents, but they have years of piling on all this other stuff where, when you go through your EMT training, they really don't talk about that stuff. At least when I went through EMT training, when I went to paramedic school back in the 80s, they didn't talk about it. I don't think they're really talking much about it now. It deserves a lot of education. Same thing with the military. When you go to basic training, you get taught how to, disassemble, reassemble your rifle. You get all the basic soldier skills and all that, but they never teach you about your head. They're going to take you, right? Pick you up, take you overseas and drop you into combat. Say, hey, you're going on a 15-month deployment, go through all the stuff. And then when they come back, like, they have you meet with a shrink once. Some of that stuff comes on later. They need to do it ahead of time. If you educate people ahead of time about it, they know they will be much better at knowing when they need help and be able to go get the help that they need.
Yeah. Yeah. The problem with all of that, though, is it's usually kind of like everything in our society. It's only when it becomes too late or it becomes an issue that can't be ignored anymore that it becomes something that they work on and they try to fix. Kind of the same thing with the way society is in these shootings and stuff that are going on. The mental health issues that could be addressed, but nobody does anything until it becomes a big issue, until it has to be addressed, until it's right in front of their face.
We talked about it last week, right? You think about the two shootings they had, the one up in Colorado at the Club Q, and then the one at the Walmart that they just had. And when you read through that, like, both of those people had huge mental health issues. Everybody asks, well, what's the difference? Why are shootings going up? Because our mental health is getting worse in this country. We're not doing anything about it. Mm-hmm. We had school shootings back. I mean, there was some back I remember a big one that was back in the 60s. We've had school shootings, but nothing like we have now. And you look at every one of these cases, and they're either someone with, like, the shooting that was down in Florida a while back that was I think a Muslim guy that wanted to go do whatever. But then you have all these shootings seem that the tie-in is the person's whacked out of their head. You look at that kid that shot the Colorado school up. His dad was a Fruit Loop. His mom was busted for arson. Like, this dude was a mess. He should have gotten help, but they didn't. He did a bomb threat a year ago. On live streamed a bomb threat and had the cops trying to make entry on him, and just, hey, go walk around. That dude needed all kinds of help.
Yeah. And that was pretty obvious, yet it wasn't a big enough issue that they felt like they needed to address it. Yeah. Hey, Milo put in the chat, I'm curious your thoughts, because I have no idea on this, but in an SHTF event, are there situations where PTSD might help your situation? Yeah. And I suppose, I mean, it perks your 100%. Alertness up, right?
If I were to go back into working overseas again, while I'm overseas, I don't have post-traumatic stress. I mean, I do, but everything that comes with post-traumatic stress, heightened awareness, being on edge, and part of the problem with post-traumatic stress when you're in the States is my brain analyzes everything that's happening around me. It never stops. Right. So after a while, it starts getting agitated. Well, overseas, there's a reason for that. Here in the States, it's like, oh, nothing's happening. What's going on? This is weird. Right. And you start having, and then all the others just overseas, people are on edge. So you have the gallows humor. You have people that it's more of that rough sense of humor. You tell people to F off, and all the stuff. So, I mean, I got buddies that have been working overseas now. I mean, they're going on 20 years of contracting after they got out of the military. So it works in a lot of ways when you're overseas. But when you have to come back to reality is when you start having the problems. And that's not to say when I was running the security program in Baghdad, when I was the stateside program manager for that, the day I went to the hospital for the time when a doc finally said, "Hey, have you had your head examined?" That day, one of my guys overseas ate a gun. So, it does affect you over there as well. But it's a lot of the things that it does. It kind of rewards it in a way. It's like, okay, this all works. It's all working. So, but again, it's still, talking about buddies that I have that have been overseas for 20 years. No one offers them any mental health. They come home and it's like, hey, take off, go into society, hang out.
Yeah.
So
typical. That's the way we treated the military for forever. Yeah.
There's no money in the cure, right? We talk about that all the time.
Yep. You're used up. We don't need you anymore. Go away until, don't bother us until you have to. Mm-hmm. That's interesting to think about, though, because I suppose it makes a lot of sense, because there's a reason that you get PTSD, and that is because your body feels like it needs to be super alert about all this stuff. So in an SHTF situation, long-term type event, it really would be beneficial. Now, it doesn't mean that I don't suppose that means it's good for you in the long term.
No, it's not. Would be like eventually it gets to the point where, if it keeps getting bad enough, if you don't get treatment, it gets to the point where you're looking down the end of a gun.
Yeah.
It just, because it's so, you're agitated all the time because your body your subconscious it can't talk to you. Your subconscious works, that sixth sense that we have, the hair standing up in the back of our neck. That's our subconscious. It works 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. It's on. It's stronger than our brain. We go to sleep. When we're asleep, the thing that's going, hey, what do I hear a sound? Whatever, it's your subconscious. Right. So that thing goes all the time. Well, it can't talk to us. So what it does is when it's trying to analyze what's going on, when it feels something's not right, it starts letting us know. And the way it lets us know is by agitation, making us scared, making us nervous, the hypervigilance, that kind of what's going on, that stuff, that's all our subconscious trying to get us to like, hey, I don't know what's happening right now.
Yeah.
And eventually you have enough of that happen. It gets so bad. And it's so, because there's that agitation, that nervousness you get, it gives you that physical sensation, like where it's like, I don't feel good when you're nervous.
Yeah.
Well, when you have that 24 hours a day for years or weeks, months on end, that's what makes people want to eat a gun. One of those things. It just gets so overwhelming. So, yeah.
Yeah. So and one more thing on this, I know we were going to talk about the other thing, but this is a really good topic. The way it manifests in you and people in the military, and maybe even a lot of preppers, because we think about this, is it different than the way it would manifest in somebody that just lives in the city, works in an office building, that isn't trained like you've been trained, or that doesn't look at the things like, because would it be like PTSD make them just kind of go into their shell and hide from things and avoid things? Or is it all basically kind of the same brain response?
Well, it manifests itself in different ways, right? You have different ways that you try to deal with it. One of when it gets really bad, it gets to the point where you can hardly function, right? Everything, it's so, because your brain is just on this vibration going on and this terrible feeling. So like trying to take a shower is a really big thing. And then you have all this stuff where it's trying to make you literally tries to make you not feel good. So you don't try to do anything, but it's the same across the board. And how I say this to people is, would you tell a person that was violently raped? Not that there's never like an easy rape, I guess, but someone that was violently raped and attacked and all this stuff, Would you tell them that like, oh, your PTSD isn't as bad as that person over there? No. So it affects everybody within parameters pretty much the same across the board. And
Yeah.
I would say that in our society as adults, it gets back to what we always used to hear about, right? The midlife crisis. Oh, that person just folded, right? Their midlife crisis. No, they've been dealing with a bunch of crap their whole life, and they finally it finally shut them down. Your brain, your subconscious is like, I don't know what's happening here. I'm shutting you down in order to protect you. Is kind of what it's thinking. And I'd say that most of us as preppers, we prep because some sort of experiences in our life, traumas. People get all wrapped around the axle about trauma, but why do we prep? Like, we don't want bad stuff to happen. We're trying to protect ourselves from bad stuff from happening. And I would say that that's why you have a lot of the people that aren't into prepping have no concept about it. Like, I don't know why you want to be prepped. Like, why would you think about that? Well, maybe they've never really had that aha moment that comes along and go, you know what? Like, I'm not ready if something bad happens. Yeah. I know. And I double checked this with, she was a double PhD with when I went to inpatient up in Utah, my therapist up there, I double checked this with her a while back. And it's 65+% of all public safety and military have some serious childhood trauma. 65%. So think about that. Yeah. And it's one of the reasons why a lot of people go into being cops and firemen in the military. Because by me going and being an Army Ranger, yeah, I learned a lot of really cool stuff, right? But what was I really able to do now? Protect myself better. But you say, I'm going out to protect other people. It's how our mind works it. And it's even crazier is if you got 65% of the people jumping into those fields because they got some sort of traumatic stuff that makes them want to protect themselves, they already have a level of trauma happening and they're jumping in a field that's just going to throw more on top of it.
Yeah. Hey, Yardbird in the chat said, some people thrive on stress and some people just can't handle it very well. I think that's another level of, and I don't know that goes to the extent of PTSD. I think that's an everyday type thing. It depends on your personality, how you operate. Some people are good test takers. Some people aren't. Mm-hmm. I tend to do better when there's a little bit of stress, but when it really becomes like that thing we did with Kevin and the thing we did at North American Rescue, the class you put on with the trauma stuff, when it becomes that real big stress, that's why we practice, I suppose. That's why we pay attention to all the stuff we do as preppers, because when it does get to that situation, we can handle that pressure a little bit better. And I think that's probably why in the military, you do all that training before you even go out anywhere, because you got to be.
Yeah, it's all part of when you think about a lot of that. And there are people that just don't deal well with stress, right? Like we've all seen them. They go, and remember, when they're not dealing well with stress, what they're having is they're having an autonomic or a central nervous system response, right? That's your fight or flight, your freeze. That's all that happening. So, I mean, they just go straight. If there's a bad situation happening, they go straight to lose their mind and act like a knucklehead. They've gone past anything that's productive to do because they're having that stress related central nervous system reaction. I think after a while, with the training and stuff, that gets into your situational awareness, right? What do we do? You have the OODA loop, right? Observe, orient, decide, and act. Well, when you go out and you observe a bunch of stuff and you orient yourself to it through training, you're like, okay, when this happens, I do this. And sometimes this happens and this happens. You're priming the pump to understand what's like to be able to work through your problems faster. When Boyd came up with the OODA loop, one of his things was you're trying to think through the problem faster than your opponent. And if your opponent hasn't trained and hasn't thought through all these different possibilities, and you're probably going to work through it a lot faster. It's why people with experience and in things like that can walk in and I used to love it, right? When paramedic for a long time or being overseas at times, you could walk in and make stuff happen like a symphony. It's just like you floated through it.
Yeah.
It's just because you've done it so much. You've seen it. Everybody else that's really not locked up or having a trouble with it. It's the veteran cop, the veteran fire, the veteran at any job, the construction worker that can show up and everybody's like, what are we going to do? Oh, I think you just do this, this, and this, and everything works out. That's all observe, orient, decide, and act. That's someone they've primed their pump. They've gotten into their OODA loop. They've worked through it and they're really good at handling it.